In February of 1997, Mr. Nam Chung-bong crossed the Yali River and ventured into China. A dangerous but much-needed adventure to secure some food for him and his starving family. While there, Chung-bong experienced something he'd never been exposed to before. A segment of televised news which had not been censored by his homeland's propaganda and agitation department. Chung-bong was amazed by what he saw on the screen. It showed how the economy, society, and life in general were so much better, so much more free in South Korea and even in China. Stunned by the revelation, Chung-bong dared to criticize his homeland's dearest leader, Kim Jong-il. Unfortunately, though, someone was listening. As soon as Mr. Nam crossed the river again to return home, the terrifying state security department was waiting for him. For something as simple as watching the news and for voicing an opinion, Nam Chung-bong was swallowed up by the perverse apparatus created by one of the most ruthless dictatorships ever to contaminate the face of our planet. For something as simple as commenting on the news, Nam Chung-bong disappeared into one of the country's sprawling, hellish forced labor camps for political prisoners. These are the places where all hope goes to die. The Kwan-Li-So camps of North Korea. So one day, in September of 1998, former soccer player Mr. Eom Jang-soo of Hoyang City waved goodbye to his wife as he went out for his morning jog. Jang-soo had been dealing antiques with China, and during one of his business trips, had met with South Korean citizens. Now, that was a crime which the State Security Department of the Democratic Republic of the North Korea, or SSD, could not tolerate. Jang-soo never made it back from his jog. He was snatched up by SSD goons and imprisoned at Hoyong's own Kwan-Li-So, Camp number 22. In January 2009, Mrs. Park In-suk and her daughter were also arrested at Hoyong. In-suk's appalling crime had been to study the Bible during a trip to China. As per her daughter, well, her only crime was being related to an enemy of the regime. The Parks thus vanished into Camp number 16, the largest and most mysterious of North Korea's Kwan-Li-So. The Kwan-Li-So, they are only one element in the complex repression machinery engineered by the North Korean dynasty of dictators from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il, down to current jailer-in-chief Kim Jong-un. Now, after the end of the Korean War, the Kim dynasty instituted a paranoid, totalitarian communist state in which the population is controlled through propaganda, violent repression, and tightly regulated access to basic resources, even food. Most of the government's dirty work is carried out by the Ministry of Public Security, or MPS, and the State Security Department. The latter has been recently rebranded as the Ministry of State Security, or MSS, but we'll keep referring to it as the SSD for clarity. Amongst the many nefarious acts committed by these officers, they manage a software system called Faithful Servant 2.0, which allows their agents to access the files of every single citizen above the age of 17. And if you're a North Korean citizen of that age, the government will have assigned you a category within the Songbun class system. Communist regime should be all for a classless society, right? But it seems like the pampered monarchs in Pyongyang relish the idea of dividing their subjects into 51 categories, which can be grouped into three broader classes. 28% are core citizens considered loyal to the regime, descendants of Korean War veterans, peasants, and their families. 45% are labeled as wavering of dubious loyalty. These are merchants, intellectuals, and people who have had contact with China or South Korea. 27% are deemed hostile. This class included people with religious beliefs of any kind, descendants of capitalists and landlords, or anyone who is believed to be associated with external powers. Unsurprisingly, the latter two classes in the Songbun are the ones more likely to fall within the grasp of the MPS and the SSD and to be interned within their respective system of camps. The MPS oversees the long-term prison labor facilities, or Kyo-Hwa-So. Now here, ordinary citizens and political prisoners serve fixed-term sentences during which they have the opportunity to communicate with their families. They may even enjoy early release as part of nationwide amnesties. Nonetheless, prisoners are still subject to inhuman conditions, backbreaking forced labor, and induced starvation, leading to frequent early deaths. The Kyo-Hwa-So camps might be compared to a grueling purgatory. And if they are purgatory, the Kwan-Li-So are sheer hell on earth. These camps are managed by the SSD and are exclusively dedicated to political prisoners, and, as established earlier, even reading the Bible or speaking to a South Korean national counts as a political crime. Those who enter a Kwan-Li-So truly abandon all hope, as release, let alone escape, are extremely rare. Prisoners are not allowed to communicate with the outside world, while their friends and relatives are left in the dark as to what has happened to them. And if you are the relative of a prisoner, that's the best that can happen to you. The worst-case scenario is for some SSD goon to put in practice the Yong-Jua-Jay system, or guilt by association. This means that up to 3 generations of the same family can be locked into a Kwan-Li-So as punishment for a single member's alleged crime. As part of this same system, even the children born to inmates within the camp are treated as prisoners. This is perhaps the most perverted aspect of an already repugnant system. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people who were born within the camp have never known and will never know anything different than life in the camp itself. A life in which slavery, torture, death by starvation are a daily occurrence, guaranteed by the ever-watchful eye of the SSD. This bureau apparently fields anything from 30,000 to 100,000 agents, although let's keep in mind this is North Korea, so accurate information is not always easy to come by. Before the 1990s, the SSD mostly dealt with eliminating direct threats to the Kim family and their cronies. After the famine and economic crisis of the mid to late 1990s, thousands of citizens tried to escape to South Korea or China looking for a better life or simply for some food. Others turned to religion, and many realized that their leaders were not so dearest after all. Since then, the SSD redirected their efforts away from conspirators and power struggles while cracking down on ordinary citizens. It was this phase in security activity that prompted an expansion of the already existing Kwan-Li-So. This was part of Kim Jong-il's stated policies, quote, "We must expand camps for political prisoners in strategic locations and maintain strict control over traitors. Now we are fighting an invisible war with class foes. The confused elements at home are more dangerous than the enemy outside. My dear comrades, you are fighters at the forefront of the revolution. I sleep comfortably because all of you are out there." End quote. Now, if you happen to fall foul of the SSD, one or more of their agents will arrest you and lock you in a Ku-Ru-Jiang, a detention facility. You'll likely spend some 6 to 12 months locked there, all the while being relentlessly interrogated and tortured. If your family is lucky, they'll never hear from you again, at least not from the SSD, nor the judiciary. If they are not lucky, your relatives will be found guilty by association and escorted to a Ku-Ru-Yang. After the initial detention period, you'll likely be subjected to a show trial, which will inevitably conclude with your deportation to a Kwan-Li-So, which you will have scant chances to return from. Once there, you will become one amongst 80 to 200,000 political prisoners whose existence the North Korean government refuses to acknowledge. And there's a high likelihood you may join the more than 400,000 victims estimated to have died within a Kwan-Li-So. But while the exact number of inmates cannot be confirmed, the existence of the Kwan-Li-So is out of the question. The reality of the camps has been confirmed by the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, or HRNK, who regularly monitor the facilities through satellite imagery collected by Digital Globe and Airbus Defence and Space and inspected by All Source Analysis. But it became known to the world thanks to the courageous testimonies of the very, very few who were able to return to the outside world. Survivors like Shin Dong-hyuk, born and raised within a Kwan-Li-So, whose story was told by journalist Blaine Harden in the book Escape from Camp 14, or like Kang Chol-hwan, who lived in a camp from the age of 9 to 19 before escaping to South Korea and heading the North Korea Strategy Center. In an interview with the George W. Bush Institute, Mr. Kang clarified the difference between the North Korean system, based on the Soviet gulags, and the Nazi concentration camps, quoting him. The purpose of Hitler's concentration camps was mass extermination. The North Korean prison camp's purpose is gradual extermination, and to have their prisoners realize their sins. Since the end of the Korean War and up to this day, the Kim regime has operated 6 known Kwan-Li-So, of which 1 has been closed and may have been repurposed. Let's start with the best known one, thanks to Blaine Harden's book Camp 14, also known as Khaechon Political Prison Camp. Camp 14 was established in 1959 and it's located 61 kilometers to the northeast of the capital Pyongyang, and it covers an area of 159 square kilometers, roughly half the size of Philadelphia. This sprawling structure holds between 15,000 and 43,000 prisoners who spend their day engaging in tree logging, looking after livestock, tending to fish farms, and threshing, i.e. separating grains from their plants. Based on this description, one might interpret Khaechon as some sort of large collective farm, with nothing sinister about it, but Shin Dong-hyuk's memoirs make it clear that Camp 14's main harvest consisted of constant fear, unbearable hunger, and explosive violence, often perpetrated against small children. Even larger than Camp 14 is Camp 15, or Yodok. This is located some 120 kilometers northeast of Pyongyang and covers an area of 365 square kilometers, which is larger than the entirety of Philadelphia. The camp holds 50,000 men, women, and children distributed across a rather complex structure. The perimeter, in fact, includes 42 farming villages to house the inmates, as well as 2 separate colonies dedicated to forced labor, Pyeongchang-ri and Yongpyong-ri. Here, some prisoners may be assigned to work in a textile plant or even a distillery where snake brandy is produced, because, alright then, what the f*** is snake brandy? Most convicts will be forced to work in a gypsum quarry and a gold mine, suffering frequent injuries or death due to there being a bit of a lack of safety equipment. And even if they survive the brutal work conditions, they may be dragged to Koek, Camp 15's area, specially dedicated to summary executions. In 1999, Camp 15 was expanded with Serimchon, a small, revolutionizing processing zone. This is a feature of a limited number of North Korean camps. To clarify, the vast majority of Kwan-Li-So are categorized as total control zones, i.e. maximum security areas from which a political prisoner will never be released. But convicts who enjoy the right familial connections or who have committed lesser crimes may be transferred to a revolutionizing processing zone from which they may eventually be released. One of Stomach-Churning's internees, Mr. Jang Kwang-il, was indeed released, escaped North Korea, and founded No Chain, the Association of North Korean Political Victims and Their Families. Based on satellite imagery, HRNK found that the Stomach-Churning zone was shut down in 2014. Thanks to Mr. Jung, the Human Rights Committee learned that, quote, of the 181 former prisoners, 2 were executed and 1 died from torture and beatings. 23 died of malnutrition or starvation. 5 were taken away and their fate is unknown. 15 are known to be alive. Several are in South Korea. 1 is believed to be in the United States. 7 are believed to have been personally released by Kim Jong-il. The status, fates, and whereabouts of 121 are completely unknown. End quote. The next destination in our voyage of doom is Camp 16, located in Hwasong County, 385 kilometers northeast of Pyongyang. This is probably the most isolated camp of an already isolated lot, as it sits deep within the forests and mountains of the Hamgyong-Samneak region. For sure, Camp 16 is the largest Kwan-Li-So. Its perimeter of 119 kilometers encloses at least 53 villages, spread over a surface area of 539 square kilometers. In other words, we're talking about a prison almost as large as Chicago. According to HRNK, this facility dates back to at least 1983. Based on satellite imagery and scant testimonies, the sprawling location is less populated than other camps, with up to 20,000 residents imprisoned for life in a total control zone. Those unfortunate souls are likely wasting away at the local fisheries, livestock farms, mines, and hydroelectric power plants. But there is an adjacent, mysterious facility which may draw its workforce from Camp 16. This is Pyongyang-ri, North Korea's only known nuclear test site. The subterranean testing area, in fact, lies just to the west of Camp 16, and their respective perimeters share some 16 kilometers of boundaries. HRNK's satellite imagery analysis revealed how there is even a short road connecting tunnel number 1 at Pyongyang-ri with the prison camp. This recent finding corroborates an earlier source. A June 2009 article by South Korean newspaper Choesung-Ilbo quoted the testimony of a North Korean defector, a former prison guard. The defector revealed that since the 1990s, young prisoners from Camp 16 and other facilities were forcibly drafted to work at the nuclear site. Apparently, this work detail, quote, was a source of fear among the political prisoners. Once taken there, no one came back alive. Moving on, we encounter another structure with an air of mystery about it, Camp 18, or Pukchang Political Prison Camp. This area is located on the banks of the river Tidong and just opposite Camp 14, which we described earlier. While covering only 71 square kilometers, which is still really big, number 18 housed a population of some 50,000 at its peak. Some 30,000 were inducted into forced labor such as threshing, livestock farming, and coal mining, while the remaining 20,000 were young children or elderly relatives swept up in the madness of guilt by association. The Kwan-Li-So features many peculiarities. For starters, it is managed by the Ministry of People's Security, MPS, and not by the SSD like the other ones. Also of note is that Pukchang was something of a VIP camp. First established in 1958, in the 1990s it was used to confine high-ranking officials and their relatives who had fallen afoul of Kim Jong-il, such as Agricultural Secretary Seo Kwang-si. The final and most mysterious aspect to consider is whether Camp 18 actually still exists or not. By 2006, the prison had experienced an unknown number of breakouts, probably just a handful, but too many for the regime to tolerate. As escapees and defectors started talking about this camp specifically, the MPS ordered its gradual closure. So at least officially, this camp doesn't exist any longer. But the ever-vigilant HRNK and their eyes in the sky have reported plenty of activity in the area as recently as 2024. Quoting them, "The camp, or its successor organization, remains active, albeit at a reduced level compared to its predecessor." End quote. The report speculates that this Kwan-Li-So might still be pretty much open for its revolting business, albeit under just a different official designation. Quoting them again, "A semantic sleight of hand which would allow the North Korean regime to claim the facility had been deactivated." End quote. There's no such ambiguity about Camp 22, aka Harrowing, confirmed as closed since 2012. Harrowing was located more than 800 kilometers to the northeast of Pyongyang on China's doorstep. At its peak, it counted 50,000 prisoners, many of whom were transferred to Camp 16 after the shutdown. The whereabouts of several thousand more prisoners remain unknown. Most of what we know about Camp 22 comes from the testimony of former guard An Myong-chol, one of 1,600 personnel who enforced security within the perimeter, itself guarded by an inner electric fence and an outer ring of barbed wire. Mr. An recalled his shock upon first arriving at number 22 as he observed the effects of malnutrition on inmates. All of them appeared as walking skeletons, with most displaying some form of physical deformity or impairment. The defector estimated that up to 2,000 prisoners died of starvation every year, most of them being children. Other lives were cut short more quickly via public execution. These were held in full view of the prison population until the mid-1990s, until camp administrators started fearing a revolt. Since then, executions moved to a secret site known as Sugol. Our journey concludes with the smallest Kwan-Li-So, Camp 25, a very short drive northwest of the port of Chongjin, 728 kilometers northeast of Pyongyang. This facility may have started life as a POW camp for South Korean soldiers at the end of the Korean War, but was converted to a Kwan-Li-So in the first half of 1970. Number 25 experienced a large expansion between 2003 and 2015, with its perimeter growing by 72%. Even so, the surface area remains relatively contained at barely 1 square kilometer, which is still more than 2 Vatican cities. Much like other Kwan-Li-So, the 5,000 prisoners of Camp 25 are exploited in agriculture and light industry. What distinguishes the Chongjin structure from other larger counterparts are the additional security measures. Satellite photos reveal the presence of an enclosed, walled-off, high-security prison compound, as well as 2 anti-aircraft batteries just outside the southern perimeter. Now, thus far, we've reviewed the 6 known Kwan-Li-So one by one and appreciated their differences. At the same time, it's possible to pick up some common characteristics to understand what is their ultimate purpose, how they are kept secure, what could you get locked up in there for, and what type of hardships might you expect. Well, these camps fulfill a number of purposes. The most obvious one is to segregate and punish those citizens who are considered to be unredeemable enemies of the state. This is a vast category which might include high-ranking rivals to the Kims and their bootlickers, as well as well-meaning officials accused of underperforming at their jobs. The majority of the Kwan-Li-So population is composed of ordinary citizens guilty of one or more of the offenses of wrongdoing, wrong thinking, and wrong associating. Critics of the regime, or anyone suspected of engaging in anti-government activity, may be found guilty of the first 2 offenses. And to be categorized as an anti-government activist, sometimes it takes as little as reading the Bible, taking a peek at the Chinese news, or listening to South Korean radio. A large fraction of wrongdoers are those citizens who attempt to flee to China seeking political asylum. According to HRNK, most North Korean women escaping to China are forced into unwanted marriages and essentially kept as slaves. If found, they're forcibly repatriated as the Chinese government does not recognize their status as refugees. In most cases, wrong-thinkers and wrongdoers are sent to a Kwan-Li-So without due process, and very often they're accompanied by those guilty of wrong associating, the unknowing grandparents, parents, siblings, and/or children of the primary political prisoners. Apparently, the guilt by association principle stems from a 1972 statement by the first North Korean dictator Kim Il-sung, quoting, "Factionalists or enemies of class, whoever they are, their seed must be eliminated through 3 generations." End quote. Now, this system is thus designed as a measure to surgically remove from the body of North Korean society anyone who might be linked to a political offender, anyone who might be guilty of wrongdoing, wrong thinking, and associating with the wrong people. Moreover, the constant threat of being sent to a Kwan-Li-So is wielded as a psychological weapon, allowing SSD agents to keep in check an already indoctrinated, half-starved, and terrified population. There is one final category of prisoners, one which would be very difficult to accuse of any wrongdoing or wrong thinking. Those children who are born into the system, sometimes as a result of sexual assault, sometimes as a result of an arranged marriage between inmates imposed by camp authorities. These children may be expected to work from a very young age, but they will also have the opportunity to attend a school within the camp. In addition to schools and work-related structures, much of the camp's services is taken by accommodation facilities. And while there are barracks and cells for solitary confinement and torture, the majority of the population resides in rural villages. 2 or more families will share the same cramped house with little access to basic commodities such as running water and electricity. These villages will be surrounded by vast security perimeters and kept under constant watch by contingents of more than 1,000 heavily armed guards. For example, Camp 15 is enclosed by 85 kilometers worth of barbed wire fence, almost 5 meters tall, punctuated by 25 watchtowers. While the guards at Camp 16 have laid out heavy machine gun posts along the most likely escape routes, are ready to mow down prisoners in emergency situations. As mentioned earlier, Camp 25 seems to be particularly keen on security, despite its small size and relatively small prisoner population. In addition to the anti-aircraft post that we mentioned, the guards at number 25 have arranged for 40 strong points, 22 along the perimeter, 10 distributed internally, and 8 protecting the central walled compound. These security measures might appear a tad excessive, especially if you consider that most prisoners in the Kwan-Li-So are simply not fit enough to attempt an escape, let alone pose a significant threat to camp personnel. These camps are designed to conduct a gradual extermination in the tradition of the Soviet gulags and the Chinese laogai. This means that inmates of all ages are forced to live in abhorrent conditions, forced labor, frequent beatings, lack of food, lack of sanitation and medical care, which reduces them into just pale ghosts barely able to stand. Reports of survivors and defectors consistently describe prisoners covered in dirt from the infrequency of bathing privileges and marked by physical deformities, hunched backs from years of bent-over agricultural work in the absence of sufficient protein and calcium in the diet, and missing toes and fingers from frostbite, and missing hands or arms or legs from work accidents." End quote. The most salient feature of day-to-day prison labor camp life is the combination of below-subsistence food rations and extreme hard labor. So let's talk about the main weapon of mass desperation wielded by the camp authorities, a perpetual state of maliciously inflicted hunger, a malignant campaign of chronic semi-starvation by which prisoners are fed just enough to conduct their forced labor duties while wasting away into barely standing skeletons. A typical daily ration may consist of as little as 18 grams of rice and salted vegetable soup per meal in accordance with criminal law. This criminally insufficient fare is the cause of widespread pellagra, a vitamin deficiency which results in chronic diarrhea, dermatitis, and even dementia. If prisoners underperform in the work details, guards will punish them by withholding whatever little food they distribute. Naturally, inmates may try to supplement their diets by eating anything they can lay their hands on: grass, roots, food intended for farm animals, even rats and snakes. But if they are caught in the act, they'll receive further punishment, usually in the form of solitary confinement, a beating, or even summary execution. We've already mentioned the many types of work carried out by the Kwan-Li-So inmates. What these tasks have in common is that they're grueling, extremely dangerous, and performed without proper tools, let alone safety equipment. Shing Dong-hyuk, the young survivor of Camp 14, reported how more than half of his fellow schoolmates were forced to work in the coal mines and suffered death from collapses, explosions, and gas poisoning. Prisoners working in the open air during winter have to make do with what little protection from the elements they can muster and are basically dressed in rags and torn shoes. According to the publication Daily NK, quote, "If prisoners are able to avoid death, they still risk being disabled or losing a limb. Frostbite from working in freezing conditions with little protection from the elements causes amputations to be commonplace." End quote. According to estimates of defecting guards, the annual death rate from forced labor was as high as 25%. Most deaths resulted from work-related accidents or disease. But a former guard at Kwan-Li-So number 22 reported how camp authorities frequently beat prisoners who did not meet their work quotas. These violent punishments resulted in so many deaths that officers had to instruct their underlings to be less violent, which was nice of them. Even if the guards restrain themselves, the civilian camp managers can be equally vicious. An anonymous source stated to Daily NK that, quote, there have been about 16 cases of managers killing prisoners by beating them to death with whips or the butt plate of their rifle, or by punishing them by stepping on their neck with their boot. However, they record these cases as accidental deaths in their reports. End quote. It should be apparent how violence is constant, inescapable, and an ever-present threat hanging over the lives of these expendable prisoners. Kwan-Li-So, a former intelligence agent, after defecting admitted that, quote, prisoners were like pigs or dogs. You could kill them without caring whether they lived or died. In addition to the routine or impromptu beatings, inmates are also subject to frequent sessions of torture used as an interrogation technique or as a punishment. A common method is to condemn prisoners to solitary confinement, locking them into very small enclosures, the sweat boxes. Here, they cannot fully stand, lie down, let alone move, and they're given almost no food and are forced to sustain themselves by eating insects on the cell's floor. Moreover, they have to endure frequent beatings by the guards, leading to permanent injuries or even death. Shing Dong-hyok, the survivor of Camp 14, described how he had to endure a particularly gruesome form of torture. After his mother and brother attempted to flee the camp, he was suspended with a winch over a tub full of burning coals. The guards then lowered him over the fire, so much so that he could smell his own burning flesh. As the interrogators shouted questions at him, one of them pierced his abdomen with a metal hook until he lost consciousness. Escape attempts or even minor violations such as stealing food can incur the most extreme form of punishment, execution by hanging or firing squad. And guards can get creative with their murder methods. Former prisoner Lee Young-kak stated how an attempted escapee was tied behind a car and then dragged to death. A prisoner who witnessed the execution could not help but shouting out against such an atrocity, an act of courage which was rewarded with an instant bullet to the head. Sometimes executions are carried out on the spot by a civilian member of staff. Shing Dong-hyok reported how he once witnessed the murder of a classmate of his, a 6-year-old girl. The teacher at the camp discovered that the girl was hiding 5 grains of corn in a pocket. That's all it took for the teacher to beat her to death in front of the class. While camp administrators may designate secluded areas to conduct executions in secret, often these are carried out in public to serve as a warning to prisoners. Survivors reported that on occasion, inmates were forced to desecrate the corpses of the executed by throwing stones at them, striking them, or even mutilating the bodies. Survivor Kang Chol-hwan reported how the prisoner witnesses were required to hurl stones at the dead until the skin on the corpse's face began coming off. Sometimes the murderous intent is directed against the unborn. While there are many cases of children born within the camps, there are also numerous reports of forced abortions. These may be caused directly via kicks to the stomach of pregnant women or injections of salt water to the uterus, or indirectly by assigning pregnant women to the most brutal work details, thus inducing a miscarriage. These methods are applied to women who are imprisoned during the early stages of pregnancy or who become pregnant while in the camps. By the way, such pregnancies are often the result of sexual assault by the guards themselves. Some women are imprisoned after they have already reached an advanced stage. Especially if the father of the baby is Chinese, the women are allowed to give birth only for the newborn to be immediately suffocated. As the Kwan-Li-So inmates are subjected to the threat of violence, death, to constant starvation and relentless indoctrination, it's no surprise that they become their own worst enemies. Frequently, prisoners will turn on each other, denouncing their fellow inmates to camp authorities. Over time, they may develop a complete acceptance of their condition. Especially for those who have been in prison since childhood or even birth, all they know and experience is this hellish life in which sadness, remorse, empathy, humanity are completely unknown concepts. These emotions, coupled with guilt and paranoia, may surface only after inmates have left the camp, which, as we described, is an extremely rare case, especially for those who experienced life in the total control zone. The Pyongyang government may have designated specific areas as total control zones, but it could be argued that the entire Democratic Republic of North Korea is just one large total control zone, a massive prison camp in which the souls and bodies of more than 26 million people are crushed under the heel of arguably one of the worst jailers in the world, the Kim family and their associates. As stated in March 2013 by the UN Commission Inquiry on Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the government, quote, has created a socio-economically and physically segregated society where families of persons who are considered politically suspect are relegated to marginalized areas. The state imposes a virtually absolute ban on ordinary citizens traveling abroad, thereby violating their human right to leave the country. Furthermore, the Commission found that the dictatorship routinely employs controlled starvation, indoctrination, and armed violence to perpetrate a vast array of crimes against humanity, including, quoting them again, extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, forced abortions and other sexual violence, persecution on political, religious, racial, and gender grounds. Through these means, the North Korean population is kept controlled and imprisoned against a constant climate of fear. This is probably not news to anybody watching this video. Nonetheless, we hope we've contributed a harrowing yet much needed glimpse into the Kwan-Li-So. While still relatively unknown, they should belong to the same hall of infamy as the Nazi and fascist concentration camps, the Soviet gulags, the Chinese Laogai. We would love to be able to conclude this episode with a message of hope. But short of a complete regime change, there's little we can do as ordinary citizens to put an end to this blatant rejection of all that it means to be human. One thing we can do, and ask you to do, is support the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, the HRNK, by heading to hrnk.org, reading their excellent reports, and, if possible, maybe making a contribution. And with that, thank you for watching.